In this video, we're going to be taking a look at Avowed, which is a new role-playing game being developed by Obsidian that's coming to the PC and Xbox Series X, likely sometime next year or the year after. This game was recently revealed at the Xbox event that was live-streamed on Twitch and other platforms, and is probably the star of the show in my opinion. This is the game I think I'm most looking forward to, although I am cautiously optimistic about Fable as well. Now, if you didn't know, this isn't just another RPG by Obsidian. It actually takes place in the Pillars of Eternity universe of Eora, which is quite intriguing to say the least. We've never seen a Pillars of Eternity game done in first person, and there are just a ton of questions about how this is going to work. One has to wonder how this is all going to come together. Are they going to use the classes from Pillars of Eternity, for example? Are we going to see Chanters and Rangers and Fighters and Monks and all of them in there? Are their abilities going to make it into the game? What will they look like? How will they play? It's all really, really intriguing. And as much as I love the character development in games like Skyrim or Oblivion, I think there's room here for this to be even more exciting because you can do some things passively with these classes, if they are indeed in the game, that will make things just a bit more intriguing. For instance, maybe the Ranger has a pet that you can command to attack, which would be really cool, or to see some of the wizard spells being, in action in first person could be amazing. And of course, there are other questions as well, like, is the game going to have party members? Are you going to have companions? Are there going to be companions that we've seen before? What sort of lore are they going to draw from, and how much of Pillars of Eternity is going to be in this game itself and things we recognize? Pillars of Eternity in general has phenomenal lore and a great world. Even though people were a little bit critical of Pillars of Eternity 2's story, the world itself of Pillars of Eternity is very, very well built, and there is a lot that they can do here, even straying from the things we've seen in Pillars of Eternity inside this world. So it really makes you wonder, how much are they going to go with, the familiar angle, and how much are they going to go with something brand new, and what sort of blend they'll use in order to bring their fan base over to the first-person side of things. We really haven't seen too many other first-person games than in melee combat recently. Obviously, you think of Skyrim when you see the very little bit of gameplay that is shown in the trailer, just from that first-person point of view, but we don't have any idea what combat's going to look like. We don't know how it's going to play out. And it makes you really wonder, how viable is this? I mean, Skyrim and Oblivion and Morrowind don't have the greatest combat known to man, and even Skyrim and Oblivion added a third-person option so that you can play in third person, and some people like to play in third person in these type of games. It makes you wonder why they didn't take a third-person approach, or if they will add a third-person option for this, because I think it may make for better combat gameplay. It's really interesting because Fallout has taken a similar approach. They went from isometric to first person, but I think what worked about Fallout about that, even though I wasn't the greatest fan of the transition, is that it used shooting mechanics, and shooting mechanics translate very well to first person. I don't know how you do the same thing with melee. Obviously, there's going to be bows and probably ranged magic and things like that if you follow the classes of Pillars of Eternity, which we, again, don't know if they will do. But the melee combat itself may be lacking due to, just the limitations of first person. Also, in terms of character customization, you never get to see the way you look. So, if you're playing first person, you're not going to see that cool new armor or that awesome sword as much. Maybe you'll see the sword when you're swinging around, but you really won't get that sense of uniqueness as a player. And then there's, of course, is there going to be multiplayer in this game? Is it going to be a multiplayer affair? This is something I don't think people have even thought of. When you hear Pillars of Eternity mentioned in a first person, that Avowed is, your first thought is single player automatically. But will there be multiplayer? Will you be able to play cooperatively in a group? Things you can do with Pillars of Eternity as a first person game that you couldn't do in Pillars of Eternity 2 or Pillars of Eternity 1, multiplayer would be very difficult indeed in a real-time with pause scenario, though it's been done with Baldur's Gate. Maybe easier to do in a first-person setting. You can have players control things very independently in a game world that operates off the same mechanics. There's no pausing, and maybe that's something we will finally see. One also has to wonder if the success of the Outer Worlds, the recent success of it, has influenced Avowed in some capacity. If you didn't know, Pillars of Eternity 2 was not particularly financially successful and was actually outsold by Pathfinder Kingmaker, despite Pillars having a lot more hype in my opinion. So one has to wonder if they're taking the first-person approach because of the success of the Outer Worlds, or if this is something that was planned ahead of time. This also makes you wonder if we're going to see a Pillars of Eternity 3, or if Obsidian has shifted away from the isometric and is going in the realm of first-person, which is again what Fallout has done, and it's worked tremendously well for Fallout. So if it succeeds here and Avowed is actually a very well-received game and sells very well, if they'll just continue along the path of Avowed. Now, the one thing they have done here that Fallout didn't do is at least they didn't name the game Pillars of Eternity 3. They've named it Avowed, so people obviously have different expectations. This is something that we've been talking about a lot recently, the expectations of a game. Well, they've gotten away from that by calling it Avowed, so now the expectation is whatever it is for each person, but they're not expecting Pillars of Eternity 3. They're expecting something different, and I think that's going to help them tremendously. It's been a long time since we've seen a game that looks so similarly to Skyrim. A lot of people compared The Witcher 3 to Skyrim when it first came out, not because the combat or gameplay looked like Skyrim, but because of the sheer size. But here, I think people automatically, once you look at it, you draw the comparison to Skyrim. And not too many games draw that sort of comparison. A lot of, again, a lot of comparisons are drawn to the size of Skyrim, but not so much in gameplay. And what I find really, really interesting about this is Obsidian's last game, The Outer Worlds, obviously drew a lot of comparisons to Fallout. If you didn't know, Obsidian and Bethesda are not on the best terms. This is something that I don't think is a secret to many people. And it's just really funny to me that, they've sort of taken shots at Fallout, and now they're taking their shots at Skyrim, and here we are watching the aftermath. I think this is a really good thing for fans in the gaming industry, particularly of RPGs and first-person RPGs, because the more competition you have, the better these games are going to be. You only have to be better than your competition in order to succeed in just about any industry. And for the most part, Elder Scrolls 6 really didn't have any. There was nothing that you would hold up and say, let's compare this to Elder Scrolls 6. But now you have Avowed, which means that Elder Scrolls 6, which is obviously still a ways off from being published, is going to have to take Avowed into account and try and do something better than Avowed. And Avowed, of course, is going to have to try and do something better than Skyrim or Elder Scrolls 6, pardon me. And if they don't, it's going to be to their detriment. So who wins out of this? We do. We win. We get better role-playing games that should have more content in them. Taking it back to the multiplayer aspect or the potential for multiplayer, Brian Fargo did an interview not too long ago where he was talking about Divinity Original Sin 2, which is something I actually mentioned in a previous video. But he stated that more and more single-player games are going to have to become multiplayer to compete in the marketplace, and it's something that they obviously were looking into for Wasteland 3. But what's really interesting to me is this gives you the exact opportunity to do that. I mean, here you have a franchise that would have been extremely difficult to create multiplayer in a very well done way, now has that opportunity, and it could do it really, really well. I mean, everyone has always wanted a multiplayer Skyrim, a 2, 3, 4-player Skyrim game. Instead, we got the Elder Scrolls Online, but there is still a gap in that market for a type of game like Skyrim that has local co-op or has, 2 to 4 player with your party, and you go through the world and do everything together. And there's an opportunity here for Avowed to be that. Obviously, I would love if Elder Scrolls 6 did that, but I think it could be really, really interesting because, I know Brian Fargo, he's one of the founders of Fallout, so he has a lot of influence on these types of games, and he knows his stuff. So my guess is if he's in contact with Obsidian at all, this is something that Obsidian is going to be looking at very, very, they're going to be taking this very, very seriously. Other than that, I mean, I just think that a Pillars of Eternity game in first person or maybe even third person, if they add that option, could be extremely fascinating. One of the things that I really like about the Elder Scrolls games compared to Elder Scrolls Online, which I really love Elder Scrolls Online as well, is that you sort of get this grand scale of things when you're walking around in first person. Everything feels big. Everything feels massive. You feel a little bit insignificant compared to the world, and it gives it this grandiose feeling that's sort of missing in third-person games, particularly games like Elder Scrolls Online where you can zoom way, way out. Maybe not as much in games where it's right over the shoulder and things still have a grand feel to them. But can you imagine exploring for a second the world of Eora in first person, seeing these dungeons and crypts and temples and everything under the sun in this grandiose fashion? It just sounds so, so good. And I'm not generally an advocate of this. Again, I was not a fan of the direction Fallout went with first person. I'm still not sure how I feel about it. I've enjoyed the Fallout games, obviously, but if it were up to me, I don't think I would have ever made that jump. However, I've seen what Fallout has done, and I just wonder if this won't be amazing in first person, and I can't help but get excited about it. So what do you guys think? What are you most excited about in a first-person Pillars of Eternity game, or a game that takes place in the Pillars of Eternity universe in first person? Is it the multiplayer? Is it the world exploration? Is it seeing everything on a grandiose scale? Is it the character building? What is it that you would love to see in Pillars of Eternity in first person, and what gets you excited about this game?